last session, we talked about the fall of Jerusalem and how Titus sacked the city and took items from the temple. He placed the sacred items in pagan temples in Rome and then mocked the Most High by saying he fell because of the power of the Roman gods. But what has not been reported is that Titus and Rome was punished severely for what they did. We need to talk about it. Let's look at some information from History Skills. The name of this article is The Fall of Jerusalem, Destruction of Pompeii, and the Birth of the Colosseum, the Life of Emperor Titus. It says Titus was the Roman emperor from AD 79 to 81. He was the son of the previous emperor, Vespasian, who was the founder of the Flavian dynasty and succeeded his father as emperor after his death. Titus is best known for his military campaigns in Judea and his capture of the city of Jerusalem in AD 70. It goes on to say that in AD 70, Titus captured and destroyed the city of Jerusalem after a 2-year siege. He was awarded a triumph for his victory over the Yehudis and celebrated with a triumph when he returned to Rome in AD 71. Now this is key because if you remember, his father, Vespasian, began the attack against Jerusalem, but he was called back to Rome when Nero committed suicide. So he left Titus in charge of carrying out the destruction. So it says, when Vespasian died in AD 79, Titus succeeded him as emperor. Now listen, the most famous event that occurred during Titus's time as emperor was the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in AD 79, just a few months after he took the throne. So how did Vespasian die? He died from a mysterious fever. Strange, isn't it? But look at the timeline. Titus succeeded his father and became emperor in AD 79. When did Vesuvius erupt? That same year, a few months after he took the throne. It seems like all of this needed to happen under Titus's reign. Listen, it says the eruption caused significant destruction in the region of Naples and the cities of Pompeii and Herculaneum. They were buried in ash and pumice, resulting in the death of thousands. They lost thousands. Now think about how many people they wiped out in Jerusalem. But it wasn't over for them. There was more to come. It says Titus appointed 2 former consuls to oversee the relief effort, while the emperor himself spent money from the imperial treasury to support the reconstruction. The emperor took the additional step of personally visiting the ruins of Pompeii to hear about the plight of the local people. But listen, he also did this a second time in the spring of the following year. So Pompeii was destroyed in AD 79, and in AD 80 there's another disaster. It says during this second visit, Titus learned of another disaster occurring back in Rome. A large fire had broken out in Rome, which burnt for 3 days and 3 nights before it could be extinguished. A large area of the city, from the Capitol Hill to the Pantheon, was destroyed. This is the same area where he held his triumphal parade and deposited the items that he had taken from the temple in Jerusalem. Listen, it says, to make matters worse, a plague then broke out in Rome, in which many people died. Titus rushed back to the city and once more spent significant sums of his own money to help in the clearing and rebuilding of the damaged area. So, family, obviously, this is not a coincidence, but let's go on. We'll look at this information from Bible History Daily. It's entitled, The Destruction of Pompeii, God's Revenge. So we'll substitute that with the Most High's revenge. It says 9 years almost to the day after Roman legionnaires destroyed the Most High's house in Jerusalem, the Most High destroyed the luxurious watering holes of the Roman elite. Was this the Most High's revenge? So clearly folks took note of the fact that all of these things began happening the same year that Titus sacked Jerusalem. Listen to this account from an eyewitness. This is coming from Pliny the Younger, and he witnessed the event when he went with his uncle Pliny the Elder, who had tried to rescue some of the people in boats, so his uncle would also perish. But he says ash was falling onto the ships, darker and denser the closer they went. Now it rains bits of pumice and rocks that were burned and shattered by the fire. Broad sheets of flame were lighting up many parts of Vesuvius. Their light and brightness were the more vivid for the darkness of the night. Buildings were being rocked by a series of strong tremors and appeared to have come loose from their foundations and to be sliding this way and that. Outside, however, there was danger from the rocks that were coming down. It was daylight now elsewhere in the world, but there the darkness was darker and thicker than any night. Then came the smell of sulfur, announcing the flames, and the flames themselves onto the ships, darker and denser the closer they went. It says, then came the dust, though still lightly. I looked back. From his flight from Misenum, we had scarcely sat down when a darkness came that was not like a moonless or cloudy night, but more like the black of closed and unlighted rooms. You could hear women lamenting, children crying, men shouting. This is another eyewitness's account. It was described by Dio Cassius in his Roman history. It says, the whole plain round about Vesuvius seethed, and its summits leaped into the air. There were frequent rumblings, some of them subterranean, that resembled thunder, and some on the surface that sounded like bellowings. The sea also joined in the roar, and the sky re-echoed it. Then suddenly a portentous crash was heard, as if the mountains were tumbling in ruins, and first huge stones were hurled aloft, rising as high as the very summits. Then came a great quantity of fire and endless smoke, so that the whole atmosphere was obscured, and the sun was entirely hidden, as if eclipsed. Thus day was turned into night, and light into darkness. Listen, some believed that the whole universe was being resolved into chaos or fire. While this was going on, an inconceivable quantity of ashes was blown out, which covered both sea and land and filled all the air. It buried 2 entire cities, Herculaneum and Pompeii. Indeed, the amount of dust taken altogether was so great that some of it reached Africa and Syria and Egypt, and it also reached Rome, filling the air overhead and darkening the sun. There, too, no little fear was occasioned that lasted for several days, since the people did not know and could not imagine what had happened, but like those close at hand believed that the whole world was being turned upside down, that the sun was disappearing into the earth, and that the earth was being lifted to the sky. You all, obviously, these witnesses were allowed to tell the story so that people would know what happened. Was this just a coincidence, or was it retribution for what Titus had done in Jerusalem? Now, the article says there's even more evidence from Pompeii itself that this was divine vengeance. It says after the destruction, the site was subject to looting. Isn't that what they did in Jerusalem? It says people who had managed to flee came back to see whether they could retrieve some of their possessions. But it goes on to say one such person came back to a house in an area of Pompeii designated today as Region 9, Insula 1, House 26, after having walked through the desolation of the city. He looked about and saw nothing but destruction, where once there had been buildings and beautifully frescoed walls. Disconsolate and aghast, he picked up a piece of charcoal and scratched on the wall in large black Latin letters, and this is what he wrote: Sodom, Gomorrah. So as he saw it, the divine punishment of these two cursed biblical cities was echoed in the rain of fire on Pompeii. Now let's take a look at the other Italian city that was destroyed, and this comes from RomanEmpireHistory.com. It says Herculaneum, or Ercolano in modern Italian, was a thriving Roman town situated at the base of Mount Vesuvius. This city was founded by the ancient Greeks around the 4th century BC, and the city would eventually be absorbed into the expanding Roman Empire. So this city, it says, during its heyday, was a flourishing city. It was a seaside resort for the Roman elite, and it attracted wealthy residents and tourists with its luxurious villas, lush gardens, and stunning coastal views. So do you think the Most High was sending a message? You touch mine, now I touch you? So it says Herculaneum's fate was sealed on the fateful day of August 24th, AD 79, when Mount Vesuvius erupted in a cataclysmic explosion, burying the town beneath a thick layer of volcanic ash and pyroclastic flows. It says this sudden and devastating event led to the preservation of Herculaneum's ancient streets, buildings, and even some of its residents, who were encased in the volcanic material and fossilized over time. Family, I believe this was to be something that would serve as a reminder that this was payback for what happened in Jerusalem. This was not a mere coincidence. You can see there in this image that Herculaneum was right at the foot of Vesuvius. And you can see that Pompeii is a little further away, but this city, or this town, Herculaneum, was buried in 20 meters of ash. That equates to 75 feet of ash, family, compared to Pompeii, that was buried in about 20 feet, which is still pretty significant. Let's look at an excerpt from this article from Tufts EDU. to see how the Romans celebrated Titus's victory when he sacked Jerusalem. So here it says Josephus describes the joint triumph of Vespasian and Titus. He said it was commemorated by the triumphal monument called the Ark of Titus that was erected by the Senate and people of Rome. The bas relief depicts the items Titus took from the temple, namely the table of showbread, the seven-branched golden candlestick, the vessel of incense, and the silver trumpets. He also took the book of the law. And I'm still asking, why would he even want that? He took the book of the law, the veil of the temple, and other spoils. According to Josephus, the veil and books of the law were deposited in the Palladium, and the rest of the spoils were taken to the Temple of Peace. And some sources say that the items were later taken to Africa when the Roman temple burned in the reign of Commodus. It says later the items would be taken to Constantinople in AD 520. But listen to what was supposedly said by an Israelite who saw the items there. He said it would not be advisable to carry them to the place at Constantinople, as they could not remain anywhere else but where Solomon had placed them. So the emperor heeded his advice. He was so alarmed by the statement that he sent all of the items to the Christian churches at Jerusalem. So these folks knew that they had to be very careful about where these items were placed. So what happened to the items? Did they just disappear into thin air? According to this article from the Jerusalem Post, it says there are several people alive that can personally attest to being eyewitnesses of the Vatican possessing temple vessels, including the menorah candelabra. Now listen, according to this article, it says the Vatican is actually built over sections of Caesar's palace. It says the Vatican, including St. Peter's Basilica, was constructed over Emperor Vespasian's Roman palace approximately 200 years after the sacking of Rome in 455 AD. Interesting. Let's keep going. It says, in fact, historian Josephus records the event in which Vespasian took for himself these items specifically as his special treasures for safekeeping, including an ancient Torah scroll. Now, according to a Vatican expert, those vessels and others found their way to the Vatican via another route after making their way to Byzantium. Now it talks about the items that they took, and it includes the temple candelabra that was given to Pope Innocent III by Baldwin I after the sacking of Constantinople and the massacre of the Christian Orthodox population. So this Vatican expert, Dr. Michael Calvo, claims that temple shofars and utensils, garments of the high priest, a gold plaque with the words Kodesh El Hashem, cultural objects, and many other objects, to include books and manuscripts, were taken by the Vatican, and they were given to churches, and they were placed in their storerooms, libraries, and museums. Now, according to a man named Benjamin Tudela, a merchant from Spain, he claims to have spent time in Rome after the election of Pope Alexander. And he says in Rome there live about 200 families of Jews who are respected and who pay no tax to anyone. Now, you want to take a guess as to who those people may have been? I'm guessing Edomites. But the author goes on to say in Rome there is the cave where Titus, the son of Vespasian, stored the temple vessels that he brought from Jerusalem. It says this was before popes took up residence in the late 1300s at the Vatican. It says it appears that indeed Vandals didn't run off with the whole horde after all. The author goes on to say there are several people alive that can personally attest to being eyewitnesses of the Vatican possessing temple vessels, including the menorah candelabra. He says, will any of them come forward and expose what they know along with themselves? No. So wherever these items are, we know that they will be returned unto us. Here's the thing though, we need people who are prepared to receive them and place them in the proper place. So Yah will cause them to be returned when the time is right. But the Gentiles will have to return them. They will have no choice, because it will be as an accursed thing if they try to keep them. Now let's go back to the events after Mount Vesuvius erupted. This information comes from RomanEmpire.net. It says the Roman Empire, people in the early emperors. We're talking about Emperor Titus. It says within an hour or so, Pompeii and Herculaneum, among several other towns and villages in the area, were engulfed by lava and red-hot ash. Many managed to escape with the help of the fleet stationed at Misenum. Titus visited the stricken area, announced a state of emergency, set up a relief fund into which was put any property of victims who died with no heirs, offered practical assistance in rehousing survivors, and organized a senatorial commission to provide whatever help it could. Yet this disaster should tarnish Titus's memory until this day. Why would this disaster tarnish his memory? Because the word on the street was that he caused this disaster because he sacked Jerusalem. It says many describing the outbreak of the volcano as divine punishment for the destruction of the great temple in Jerusalem. So family, they knew why this was happening. Not a few people, but many during that time believed it was divine retribution. And there was more to come for Titus. It goes on to say, Titus's troubles were not over with the Vesuvian disaster. While he was still in Campania in AD 80, overseeing the operations to aid the victims of the volcano, a fire ravaged Rome for 3 days and nights. Once more, the emperor provided generous relief to the victims. And guess what, you all? He would later face another disaster. He had to deal with one catastrophe after another during his short reign. People didn't have to ask why. They knew why. Now this says one of the worst epidemic of plagues on record befell the people under the reign of Titus. It says Titus tried his utmost to combat the disease not only with medical support, but also with extensive sacrifices to the gods. Now this is the same man who said the Most High had fallen under the might of the Roman gods. Apparently his gods were no match for the divine vengeance slapping him upside the head. Listen, it says, Titus, though, is not only famed for disaster, but for the opening of the Flavian Amphitheater, better known under the name Colosseum, as well. Titus finished the building work, which had been begun under his father, and inaugurated it with a series of lavish games and spectacles. But listen, on the last day of the games, though, He is said to have broken down and wept in public. His health had taken a marked downturn by then, and perhaps Titus knew himself suffering from an incurable disease. Titus also had no direct heir, which meant his brother would succeed him, and Titus is said to have suspected that this would lead to disaster. Did he remember his words and his deeds? I think so. So, how did Titus die and when? This tells us that after Titus officiated at the opening of the Colosseum, he set out for the Sabine territories, and having traveled only a short distance, he was struck with a fever and died in the same farmhouse as his father, Vespasian. Now, come on, family. You can't make this stuff up. Titus died of a fever on September 13th in AD 81 in the same villa that his father had died in. He was only emperor for 2 years. Are you hearing this? They both died of a fever in the same house. They both played a part in the destruction of Jerusalem. Did they have it coming? Some may say no, because they say it was Israel's fault for their continued disobedience. We can't deny that. But let's dig into the backstory to see how the Romans used this to their benefit. We're going to read excerpts from this article from History Collection. It says, the sack of this ancient temple funded the building of the Colosseum. Listen, it says the Roman had good reason to gloat about their victory in Judea. What started off as a rebellion in 66 AD had soon flourished into a war that was costly, time-consuming, and phenomenally difficult to bring to an end. More importantly, it had been thoroughly unnecessary, brought about by gross incompetence and insensitivity on the part of the Roman administration in Judea. In around 50 AD, a Roman auxiliary soldier had caused a riot and massacre in the Temple of Jerusalem when he exposed his genitals to the crowd. Another had stolen and torn up the scrolls of the law found in a Judean village. Finally, the Roman procurator Gessius Florus had managed to offend Jerusalem's entire Yehudi population by stealing money from the treasury of the Temple of Jerusalem. So the Romans were not without fault here. It goes on to talk about how Vespasian wanted some stability in Rome because he was the fourth emperor in just over a year. So he wanted to appease the masses. It says he waited for Titus to finish the job of capturing and completely destroying Jerusalem, which he did in the summer of 70 AD. The sack of Jerusalem involved the deaths of millions. And this information comes from Josephus, who had lost both his parents and his first wife in the event. It says, then Vespasian set about striking coins to reassure the masses of Rome's military dominance. So he had these coins minted, and what he wrote on it was Judea captured. He knew that this would please the masses. It goes on to say Vespasian decided to construct an enormous amphitheater, and the site upon which he decided to build it was deeply symbolic. After the Great Fire had swept through the city in 64 AD, Nero built an enormous pleasure palace on what used to be vast swaths of public land, and it was called the Golden House. And it says it stretched anywhere from 100 to 300 acres. Inside the palace were revolving jewel-encrusted ceilings, frescoed walls, and huge amounts of gold leaf, while on the grounds outside were groves of trees, pasturing livestock, and even a giant artificial lake. It goes on to say that work began on the Flavian amphitheater in 72 AD. The structure would be enormous, designed for a capacity of between 50,000 to 80,000. Listen, manpower for the building wasn't a problem, because it's certain that many of the 100,000 Yehudi slaves brought back to Rome after the war would have been put to work building it. So they used free labor to build this amphitheater. It says what was a problem until recently was how Vespasian funded this enormous project. It says, fortunately, we now have the answer, and it lies in a huge, recently deciphered inscription that you can see on the left wall when you enter the Colosseum. What does it say? It says, the Emperor Caesar Vespasian Augustus ordered this new amphitheater to be erected using the spoils of war. So the structure of the Colosseum was finally completed in 80 AD under Vespasian's son Titus. Titus hosted a series of inaugural games that lasted for over 100 days and included events such as gladiatorial fights, reenactments of historical and mythological battles, the execution of countless criminals, and the slaughter of more than 9,000 animals. The violence at these games was extraordinary. But considering the fact that the Colosseum had been built off the back of extreme violence, and we're talking about the slaughter of millions of men, women, and children in Judea, it says such violent games were a darkly fitting way of marking its inauguration. So yes, this was payback. Rome was punished severely for what they did. Now, of course, the enemy will never acknowledge that what happened was divine retribution. America more than likely will not acknowledge that. But here's what we know. The items will be returned. The items that were stolen, including the people, will be returned to its rightful place. And we can refer to what happened during the days of Ezra. The book of Ezra is a testament of the Most High's faithfulness. It marked the restoration of our people to our homeland. It's a reminder that no matter how horrible our circumstances may be, the Most High can and will make a way for His will to be accomplished, even if He has to use a pagan ruler like Cyrus. Let's look at the first chapter from the book of Ezra. It says, now in the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. Persia is modern-day Iran. It says that the word of the Most High by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled. The Most High stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia. Who stirred up this man's spirit? The Most High did. So that he, speaking about Cyrus, made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom, and also put it in writing, saying, thus says Cyrus, king of Persia. So listen to the proclamation. He said, all the kingdoms of the earth, of the Most High Yah of heaven, He has given me, and He has commanded me to build Him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is among you of all His people? May his God be with him, and let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build the house of the Most High Yah of Israel. He is God, which is in Jerusalem. And whoever is left in any place where he dwells, let the men of his place help him with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, besides the freewill offerings, for the house of Yah which is in Jerusalem. Now listen to what happened. It says, Then the heads of the fathers' houses of Judah and Benjamin, and the priests and the Levites, with all whose spirits Yah had moved, arose to go up and build the house of the Most High which is in Jerusalem. And all those who were around them encouraged them with articles of silver and gold, with goods and livestock, and with precious things, besides all that was willingly offered. People started giving, donating to the construction or reconstruction of the temple. It says King Cyrus also brought out the articles of the house of the Most High, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from Jerusalem and put in the temple of his gods. Isn't that what the Romans did? It says, And Cyrus, king of Persia, brought them out by the hand of Mithridath, the treasurer, and counted them out to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. This is the number of them: 30 gold platters, 1,000 silver platters, 29 knives, 30 gold basins, 410 silver basins of a similar kind, and 1,000 other articles. All the articles of gold and silver were 5,400. All these Sheshbazzar took with the captives who were brought from Babylon to Jerusalem. Who were the captives? The people who had been carried away, the Judeans, those whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried to Babylon. They were now returning to Jerusalem and Judah, everyone to his own city. And that day will come for us. Let's continue reading. We're in Ezra 3:10 through 13. It says, When the builders laid the foundation of the temple of the Most High, the priests stood in their apparel with trumpets, and the Levites, the sons of Asaph, with cymbals, to praise the Most High according to the ordinance of David, king of Israel. And they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to the Most High. For he is good, for his mercy endures forever toward Israel. This is what they were saying. It says, Then all the people shouted with a great shout when they praised the Most High, because the foundation of the house of the Most High was laid. But many of the priests and Levites and heads of the fathers' houses, old men who had seen the first temple, wept with a loud voice when the foundation of this temple was laid before their eyes. Yet many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not discern the noise of the shout of joy from the noise of the weeping of the people. For the people shouted with a loud shout, and the sound was heard afar off. And you can best believe that their shouting and praises unto the Most High got the attention of their enemies. Let's look at Ezra 4:1 through 5. Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard the descendants of the captivity were building the temple of the Most High Yah of Israel, they came to Zerubbabel and the heads of the fathers' houses and said to them, Let us build with you, for we seek your God as you do, and we have sacrificed to him since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria, who brought us here. But Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses of Israel said to them, You may do nothing with us to build a house for our Most High, for we alone will build to the Most High Yah of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us. So listen. Then the people of the land tried to discourage the people of Judah. It says they troubled them in building. The KJV says, then the people of the land weakened the hands of the people of Judah and troubled them in building. They hired counselors against them to frustrate their purpose all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. You want to take a guess as to who those hired counselors were? So those wicked heathens wrote a letter to the new king. At that time, it was Artaxerxes, and this was after the time of Cyrus. And they basically told him that he should be aware that the Yehudis that came out of captivity were back in Jerusalem, and they were building, listen to what they called it, the rebellious and bad city. And they told the king that those wicked Yehudis were not going to pay toll, tribute, and custom, and it would basically be damaging to the revenue of the kings. So they just started making stuff up. They began ranting about how horrible the Israelites were. Now listen to the king's response in verse 17. The king sent an answer to Rehum the commander, to Shimshai the scribe, to the rest of their companions who dwell in Samaria, and to the remainder beyond the river, peace and so forth. The letter which you sent to us has been clearly read before me, and I gave the command, and a search has been made, and it was found that this city in former times has revolted against kings, and rebellion and sedition have been fostered in it. There have also been mighty kings over Jerusalem who have ruled over all the region beyond the river, and tax, tribute, and custom were paid to them. Now give the command to make these men cease, that this city may not be built until the command is given by me. Take heed now that you do not fail to do this. Why should damage increase to the hurt of the kings? Now when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rehum, Shimshai the scribe, and their companions, they went up in haste to Jerusalem against the Yehudis, and by force of arms made them cease. Thus the work of the house of Yah which is at Jerusalem ceased, and it was discontinued until the second year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. Now make sure we're understanding here that Cyrus gave the decree to rebuild, but their enemies forced them to stop working. Let's read to find out how it got started again. And I'm sharing this so that we can know how we need to deal with our adversaries. They will oppose us when we're taken out of here. Don't think that the enemy wants it to be smooth sailing. So now we're looking at Ezra 5, 1 through 5, decades after Cyrus gave the go-ahead to build the temple. Let's see what finally got them working again. It says, then the prophet Haggai and Zechariah, the son of Iddo, prophets, prophesied to the Yehudis who were in Judah and Jerusalem, in the name of the Most High Yah of Israel, who was over them. So Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, the son of Zozadak, rose up and began to build the house of Yah which is in Jerusalem, and the prophets of Yah were with them, helping them. What did it take? A prophetic word. They didn't wait to get an approval from the king of Persia. They moved at the word that was given to them, and they began building. So, of course, the enemies came out in full force. The governor of the region beyond the river and their companions came to them and spoke thus to them: "Who has commanded you to build this temple and finish this wall?" Then accordingly we told them the names of the men who were constructing this building. But the eye of the Most High was upon the elders of the Yehudis, so that they could not make them cease, till a report could go to Darius. Then a written answer was returned concerning this matter. Now listen to how they responded to the heathens who had confronted them and asked who commanded them to build the temple. Listen to their response in verse 11. "We are the servants of the Most High Yah of heaven and earth, and we are rebuilding the temple that was built many years ago, which a great king of Israel built and completed. But because our fathers provoked the Most High Yah to wrath, he gave them into the hand of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the Chaldean, who destroyed this temple and carried the people away to Babylon. However, in the first year of Cyrus, king of Babylon, King Cyrus issued a decree to build this house unto Yah. Also, the gold and silver articles of the house of Yah, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken from the temple that was in Jerusalem and carried into the temple of Babylon, those King Cyrus took from the temple of Babylon, and they were given to one named Sheshbazzar, whom he had made governor." Why didn't they do this the first time? They had no response the first time. They just stopped working. So, of course, the heathens went running to make Darius aware of what was going on, just like they did the first time, but this time it backfired. Darius checked the records and found out that Cyrus did indeed issue a decree to rebuild in Jerusalem. He also found out that Cyrus had decreed that the expenses was to be paid from the king's treasury. How about that? Yah made the heathens pay for the restoration. So Darius issued a decree that Cyrus's decree had to be upheld. So many credit Cyrus with the rebuilding of the temple, but he only got things started. It was Darius who issued the decree to allow them to finish the work. Not only that, he made their enemies contribute to it. Let's begin reading in verse 7 of chapter 6. Darius has issued a command to those who wanted to stop the work. Listen to what he says. "Let the work of this house of Yah alone. Let the governor of the Yehudis and the elders of the Yehudis build this house of Yah on this site. Moreover, I issue a decree as to what you shall do for the elders of these Yehudis, for the rebuilding or for the building of this house of Yah. Let the cost be paid at the king's expense from the taxes on the region beyond the river. And this is to be given immediately to these men, so that they are not hindered. And whatever they need, young bulls, rams, lambs for the burnt offerings of the Most High Yah of heaven, wheat, salt, wine, and oil, according to the requests of the priests who are in Jerusalem, let it be given them day by day without fail, that they may offer sacrifices of sweet aroma to the Most High Yah of heaven, and pray for the life of the king and his sons. Also, I issue a decree that whoever alters this edict, let a timber be pulled from his house and erected, and let him be hanged on it, and let his house be made a refuge heap because of this. And may the Most High Yah, who causes his name to dwell there, destroy any king or people who put their hand to alter it, or to destroy this house of Yah which is in Jerusalem. I, Darius, issue a decree. Let it be done diligently. So Darius issued this command to those who wanted to stop the work. Cyrus had already restored the things that were taken from the temple. So we see Cyrus and Darius issuing decrees, but this was already a command that came from Yah. And the same thing will happen again. We will see the restoration of everything that was taken. What's the lesson for us in this? Be ready to move at the word of Yah and refuse to back down on the word he has spoken. The prophetic word came forth, and they were able to cast off fear. They began working again, ignoring the deceptive practices of the enemy to get them to quit. They had to have enough faith in the command that came forth from Yah, not a two-legged human being. We will need to have that same kind of faith, family, to stand on the Most High's word no matter what. I hope this message has been a blessing to you. Please remember to hit the like, share it, and you're also welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. We normally upload messages on Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Join me next time.